Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This is Rami Nsour here at Taiba Foundation, and we are live with the third class of the Jewels of the Quran by Imam Ghazali. Last week, we were finishing up the discussion about the various ways that we can approach the Quran. And so Imam al-Ghazali, in the first week, we went over the 10 categories, which basically begin as 3 subjects, which those are, and just for a quick review, the Quran breaks down into three areas. Who we're being called to, which is Allah, the Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path, and the state once we arrive, Jannah or Jahannam. Those 3 things. Who the Quran is calling to, how to get there, and what it looks like once we get there. And then the subsections, the 3 next sections, are the state of the people, both those who are following the straight path and those who are against it. So those 2 things, and which is the stories of those who follow the straight path and those who reject it, and then how to actually follow the straight path. Those are and if you review the first video, it goes into all of those details. Now, the other thing that Imam al-Ghazali talks about is that we should not just stick to those 5 ways of approaching the Quran, which are important, and that's how we have to approach the Quran, which is beginning with understanding the language of the Quran, the lugha, also the grammar of the Quran, the knowledge of qira'ah, how to properly recite the Quran, and then the makharij, so the qira'ah, tajweed, and makharij going together, and then tafsir. So those 5 sciences: language, grammar, the qira'ah, tajweed, and understanding the differences in the methods of recitation, and the makharij, the proper way to pronounce the letters of the Quran and the words of the Quran, and then the tafsir, understanding the meanings of the Quran. The Quran has to be approached that way. We have to approach it. But then he says that's the outer shell knowledge, and the inner shell is the knowledge of fiqh, of how to practice Islam, and how to believe, the belief system of the deen. But then beyond that, he said the Quran is also has to be approached in looking at the various ways that what the Quran is talking about. So if we want to understand what Rabbul Alameen really means, what does it mean that Allah is the Lord of creation? Then we have to understand that creation. And then he gave some examples. He said, look at the bee. He said, if we look at the ayah that says about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recounting that one of the prophets said, as a dua or as an affirmation of who Allah is, that if I am sick, He heals me, meaning Allah heals me. Well, you have to understand sickness and illness. He also talked about the which comes from medicine, and so a doctor and the knowledge that a doctor would understand that a lot better. And I gave the example of the wrestler, understanding why that wrestler who got beat by the Prophet ﷺ in a wrestling match requested to have a rematch 2 and even 3 times, and then the wrestler said, oh, that's so that the person can figure out what that move was. Okay, so if we get this understanding from Imam al-Ghazali, that he's saying, all right, we have these sciences of the Quran to be able to understand the Quran, but then we have to make that jump. And that's what I want to end on today, because Imam al-Ghazali brings a very, very interesting discussion, which is, what is this jump? How do you go from what the Quran is talking about to taking a leap to see where is it guiding us to? And this is called a ibrah. The Quran is ibrah, is referred to as an ibrah, I-B-R-A-H. And also the people who reflect on the Quran, Allah challenges people, says, this is for the people who have, the people of ibrah, the people who do this ibrah. Now, what is ibrah? The word ibrah in Arabic means to cross over. Abara. So if a person says abara nahar, a person went from one side to the other side. And so a ibra is something that takes you from one point to go to another point. And I just want to bring us up to oh, and then also where we left off last week as well, that Imam Ghazali talked about Surah Yasin, and he said, now that I've given you this method to analyze the Quran in those 3 first categories, and then the 6 subcategories, and some of those having subcategories, so we get 10 categories altogether. That was in the first lesson, and I asked if you can make a chart. Somebody actually did submit one chart, and if you review the first lesson, you'll be able to get all of those the details on how to make that chart. So Imam Al-Ghazali challenges the reader. He says, now that I've given you these 10 sections, I want you to read Surah Yasin and analyze it ayah by ayah, and then see why is it called, according to the hadith, the heart of the Quran. Why is Yasin called the heart of the Quran? And I want to get to that. But before that, we have to develop an understanding of the ibra and the amthal, and also the metaphors mentioned in the Quran. Now, we do affirm, we have to affirm, the Quran is not all metaphorical in nature. It's not parables. These are actually things that actually happen. So I'll give you an example. Some modern day people who follow the Bible, whether Christians or Jews, the Old Testament or both the Old and the New Testament, for them to reconcile some of the stories that are mentioned in the Bible, they say, oh, we don't take them literally. We take them metaphorically. They're a parable. And so in this way, they are able to say, oh, I believe in the Bible. I believe in the stories of the Bible, but it's all metaphorical. And you'll find this actually is quite common. So this is a way of tahriful kitab. It's really changing the book. So they didn't necessarily change the book literally with their hands. They say, okay, here's the book. Here's the Quran, here's the Bible, here's the Old Testament, the New Testament. And this story that's mentioned in here, we don't take it as a literal story. Now, when we come to the Quran, alhamdulillah, the majority of the ummah says, if it says it in the Quran, unless Allah tells us that this is a parable or a metaphor, a method, we're going to take it as face value. So when Allah tells us the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, of Qawm Lut, we don't take that as being a metaphor or to do some sort of mental gymnastics and flipping over to try to fit that story into our postmodern understanding of the way the world should be. You have to excuse me. This is still Ramadan, so I'm not able to drink some water to clear my throat. Excuse me. Okay, so Imam Al-Ghazali says we have to really understand that the Quran presents mithals, presents metaphors, and is trying to get us to make this jump, this leap. But before we do that, we have to affirm the zahir. We have to affirm the apparent meaning. So there were a group of people in the early time of Islam. They were called the Batinis. And so one of the things that they said is they said, oh, for the majority of Muslims who can't understand the inward reality of the ayah, you guys take the zahir. You take the outwardly apparent meaning. But for us, we're going to take the inward meaning. And in this way, one of the things that they did was that they actually changed a lot of the rules of Islam, because they said, oh, you, the people of the outward, you can take the outward, we're going to take the inward. For mainstream Islam, for real Islam, we affirm the outward of the ayah, but then we also look for inward meanings. So again, we affirm the outward of the verse, but we look for inward meanings. So, like in the story of, say, Adam alayhi salam, the creation of Adam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam, created this human being. The story is mentioned in the Quran. We affirm it, and we say that Adam has no father. And we don't give a metaphorical interpretation. So there are some people that will give a metaphorical interpretation to the stories in the Bible. So the story of Adam alayhi salam and the creation of Adam, it's affirmed in the Bible. Well, I've heard one person who is a Christian who said, well, no, actually what this is our deep-rooted fear of snakes when we used to live in the trees, i.e. the garden. So if we were to assume that we came from apes and we used to live in the trees and the tree canopy, the only predator or the main predator that we had were snakes, and the snakes used to go up there and they would eat primates. And so we developed over 60 million years a deep-rooted fear of reptiles. And so that's what's being presented in the story of Adam and Eve and the shaitan coming in the form of a reptile and so on and so forth. So they've taken that story, they've affirmed the story, that it is a story, and it's here in our book, but they have not affirmed the literal meaning of that story. They've changed it completely to a metaphorical meaning. So for us, we affirm the literal meaning, but then we also look for metaphors. And this is what Imam Ghazali is saying is very important as we approach the Quran. So he begins, one of the examples is, he said, look at dreams. And dreams is a good way for us to begin thinking about the world of metaphors, because all of dreams is about metaphors. And dreams is one way that we can approach not only our inner soul, but also al-lawh al-mahfuz, the preserved tablet in the heavens. Because according to some ahadith, the dreams that come down from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or from the angels to us, the righteous dreams, they come from the lawh to us. But we can't understand what was presented. You know, we're not getting a snapshot of what's in the preserved tablet. It's presented to us in metaphors or similes. So then he gives an example of the great dream interpreter Ibn Sirin, and somebody came to Ibn Sirin and said, I see on my hand I have a ring, and I'm using that ring to seal the mouths of people. To seal. So he's got a ring. Imagine he saw it in a dream. He's got a ring on his finger, a khatim, and he's sealing up the mouths of people. And so now just take a moment. Say somebody brought that dream to you. What would you think about it? He's got a ring on his finger, and he's sealing up the mouths of people. What would it mean to you? Ibn Sirin says, you are a mu'adhin who gives adhan in Ramadan. Before, like at the time of subh. You are the mu'adhin in Ramadan who gives adhan in the subh time. Look at that, subhanAllah. He didn't just say you are mu'adhin. He said in Ramadan and at subh time, not the other prayers. Why? Because for the mu'adhin who gives the adhan at the time of subh, what is happening to the mouths of the people who hear his adhan? They're not eating anymore. So that's the interpretation. And he gives a couple other, Imam Ghazali gives a couple other examples, but I think if you've read any of the dream interpretation material, you can see it's all about symbols, metaphors. And I mean, there's of course the example in Surah Yusuf, where the one person saw that the birds were picking at his head and the other person was pouring wine for his king. Well, one of those, it was almost a literal interpretation. Yeah, you're going to pour wine for the king, and the other person is going to be executed, and the birds will eat from his head. But when the king's dream came to him about the 7 lean cows and the 7 fat cows and the spikes of wheat and so on and so forth, nobody could understand what that meant. In fact, his court, the people, they said adghathu ahlam. These are just jumbled up dreams. So there's actually, the people who interpret dreams understand there's two types of dreams. There's true dreams, al-ru'ya salihah, and there are jumbled dreams. And the jumbled dreams, those comes from the nafs. So, if you had an interaction with somebody during the daytime, you go to sleep, you might see it in a dream. Or maybe you had an experience where you watched a movie and then you went to sleep and then you saw it in a dream. As an interesting side note, when I was young, maybe in about the second or third grade, I got a really, really bad flu. And to the point that I hallucinated. It got so bad that I hallucinated. Well, right at the onset of that flu, I was watching Superman, the movie Superman. And so in the nighttime, my dreams and my hallucinations were all related to the movie Superman. It was the Lex Luthor one where he was trying to get the nuclear missiles and so forth. So I actually saw like a nuclear missile going through my house. And there were other things that I was hallucinating, but that's how your experience can influence what you see in a dream or in a hallucination. So that's not necessarily a ru'ya salihah. It's not necessarily a true dream. But if something comes from Allah directly or from the angels, that's a true dream. And there's a number of signs to what makes a dream a true dream. I'm not going to go into this because it's not a class on dream interpretation, but it's important to know about dream interpretation that people who do that have to have the gift or the ability. You can't just open a book and start doing dream interpretation. Okay, so we have this idea Imam Ghazali is presenting. He said, look at the world of similes. And this is something that Allah has created. Allah has created angels entrusted with bringing visions down to his ibad, to his servants. And the vision that they're bringing it from the lawh, and they're packaging it in something that this person can understand. So it's not a literal like, okay, we read the law and this is what you have to do. No, it's presented in a form, and there's actually it's a mystery in a sense, and a person has to spend a lot of time, might be years, might not ever figure out what the meaning is. But part of the process is part of the purpose is in the process of that reflection and trying to figure it out. Imam Malik one time saw himself opening and closing his hand like this in a dream, and it was he sent one of his servants to Ibn Sirin to have that dream interpreted, and he said, don't tell Ibn Sirin that it's from me. And Ibn Sirin, when he heard the dream, he said, no, you didn't see this dream, you could not have seen this dream. She said, well, the person told me not to reveal who the dreamer was. He said, no, I cannot interpret until you tell me who it was. She went back, told Malik. He went back and gave her permission to reveal his name. He told Ibn Sirin she told him it was Malik. He said, yes, Imam Malik could have seen this dream, and the dream of opening and closing the hands 5 times. And he said what it was is that there were 5 of the ambiguous ayahs, the mutashabihat, that Imam Malik was trying to grasp and he was trying to comprehend. Okay, so Imam Al-Ghazali says, وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْقُرْآنَ وَالْأَخْبَارَ تَشْتَمِلُ عَلَى كَثِيرٍ مِنْ هَذَا الْجِنْسِ. And he says, know that the Quran has a lot of this, has a lot of similes. So just like the simile of that man who you had the ring and was closing, sealing the mouths of people, he says the Quran has a lot of this. And look at some of he mentioned some ahadith that mention that. He said, look at, and he starts listing out a number of hadith. If you get the book in English or Arabic, you can review those. He lists out a hadith that if we take them for face value, they're problematic in the sense that we cannot have a literal interpretation of them. We have to have a metaphorical interpretation of them. And he said there are certain things that you will find this in the Quran. So yes, there are certain things that we affirm the outward, the meaning, but then we also have to look for the inward meaning. And then Imam Al-Ghazali says, this is something very interesting. He says, وَالذَّكِي يَكْفِيهِ مِثَالٌ وَاحِدٌ وَالْبَلِيدُ لَا يَزِيدُهُ التَّكْثِيرُ إِلَّا تَحَيُّرًا. For a person who is very intelligent, all he or she needs is one metaphor. That's it. They get the message. They get the point. He says, but the person who's not intelligent, the balid, the more you give them, the more they become confused. The more you give them, the more they become confused. So if you look at, say for now, this is my interpretation of what Imam Ghazali is saying. If you look at even the stories of the Quran, there's not a lot of details in some of the, say the story of Musa. It just jumps from major event to major event, and maybe some minor details. Same thing with Surah Yusuf. From the time Yusuf alayhi salam saw the dream that he told to his father, the 11 the planets and the sun and the moon bowing to him and so forth, till that dream coming true was a period of 40 years, 40. That was being thrown down the well, sold into slavery, going into the land of Egypt, the house, being raised in the house, being attempted to be seduced by the wife of the Aziz, going to prison, coming out, managing the storehouses of the land, and then his brothers coming to get their rations, and then going back, and then coming back, and then finally everything. 40 years. That 40-year story is just taught in a number of major events. Now, some people might say, well, I need to have more details. I need a 400 or 500 page novel or fiction novel to give me all the details. And Imam Ghazali is saying you don't need all those details. Look at the details that Allah has given you, and look at what he's chosen as well. So in the story of Yusuf, we don't look at it as a parable or a metaphor. It actually happened. But why is it that Allah has chosen very specific points of that story to give to us? Now that's where your interaction with the Quran starts to develop. So you affirm the outward meaning, and you don't give tafsir yourself. You say, okay, what have our scholars said about the tafsir of this? And you understand that. Remember those 5 sciences that we need to get down here to the pearl? You affirm that. We go to the scholars who tell us what the language, the grammar, the qira'ah, the makhraj, the tafsir is, what the fiqh is, what the aqidah. Those 7 sciences now encompass everything. Now we can start doing the ibrah to go to what is meant. Why did Allah choose those certain points of the story to tell us? He didn't tell us everything. He told us those, because in those very specific points that he told us, we can take it as a ibrah, as a metaphor, in the sense of the lesson that's being told to us. I hope that makes sense. That we're not saying we take everything as a metaphor. No, we're affirming the outward, but then we're seeing what is the metaphor even in these actual events that happens. Why did he say those things for specifically? And he said, once you understand this, you'll be able to go to the higher meaning of what's intended, and you won't get caught up on these outward the outward statements, or not I shouldn't say caught up, but you won't stop there. You'll say, what is beyond that? And he gives an example. He says there's an ayah in the Quran that Allah tells us. He says, look at the heavens and how water has poured down from the heavens, from the skies, into the valleys until they filled up. And once those valleys filled up, they started running, creating little riverlets into streams, into large rivers. And then that river that was created in the valley caused the zebed, the froth, to form. Okay, so here he's giving us this. He says, look at this. Allah has told us, and we reflect on that. So Allah is saying, look at the heavens. Look at the skies. It's causing rain to come down. Look at how it fills up the valleys. And look at how those valleys all spread out in. Now we can go the scientific route, and or just the observational route, and say, oh yeah, mashallah, subhanallah, Allah's created this. Is that all that Allah wanted from us in telling us that. Now, there's a lot in there. There's a lot just in that we recognize that the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sending down this rain, and how he has filled up the valleys, and how he has allowed those valleys to, especially in the desert, because he's speaking first to the desert Arabs, but then by extension to all of humanity, to look at how Allah has created, the water cycle and the water distribution, and how it rises from the oceans. The salt water gets evaporated, and then it goes and it creates clouds, and then it moves from one land to another, and it brings down fresh water, and it fills up the valley, and that valley, distributes the water to all of these other places. If we understand that, and we observe that, and we reflect on that, that can give us a recognition and an appreciation of the power of Allah, the qudra of Allah, the blessings of Allah, and in that alone is enough. There's a lot to gain from there. But Imam Ghazali is saying, look beyond that. Why is Allah could have chosen anything in his creation to point out to us, but there's very specific points that he has pointed out to us. So then he uses as this example, Imam Ghazali says, look at that. What is being spoken about there? And some of the Mufassirin, he says, they have said that water is an example of knowledge, and the valleys is the heart, is the human heart. And so now let's reflect on that. Like Allah is telling us, look at how knowledge, he has sent down knowledge into the hearts of some people, and it has permeated their hearts, and it has nourished all the parts of their body and their being, just like you can see out here in the outward physical world what water does to a dead desert land. And then in that example of the froth, that there's also froth, which is not the fresh water that's going down there. It's just the froth and the and those little sticks that the river carries. He said that's the example of dalal, of misguidance. And then Allah mentions a number of times, وَيَضْرِبُ اللَّهُ الْأَمْثَالِ. Allah presents metaphors and similes. Why? Why is he doing this? Imam al-Ghazali is saying he's doing it to develop in us, or this is my interpretation of what Imam al-Ghazali is saying, is that Allah is giving us these similes to develop in us that power of having ibrah, of going from one point and crossing over to what's intended by this. So we have everything. Imam al-Ghazali says that everything has a had and a haqiqah. It has a definition and a reality. So we look at the definition. Those are those 5 sciences, and the other 2 sciences we define. What is this? What is the story? Also by our observation. Okay, we know what sky is. We know what rain is. We know what valley is. We know all of these things. That's the had. But what is the reality of this? Allah is trying to point us towards something else. Look at how this is a metaphor for how knowledge can be in your life. And then Imam al-Ghazali says, so in conclusion, he said, no, that sometimes your understanding is only able to grasp certain things, your cognition. You're only able to cognitively understand certain things. And so that's how it's presented. So he goes back to the example of the dream. He said, you would not be able to process the information if it was brought directly down from the Lawh al-Mahfuz, from the tablet. And so it's presented to you in a way that you can process it. He said, example, like going back to the person with the ring. He said, that news was brought, like, think about it. Here's a person who gives his adhan, and he's doing it in subh. And when he presents that method, when he presents that example or that dream to a dream interpretation, a person that can go from the ibrah says, okay, I understand the definition of what you saw, but I also can go cross over and reach the reality of what is trying to be represented by those symbols, by that imagery. because you wouldn't be able to get that, understand that, if it came directly in its original form from the Lawh. And so Allah had the angels present it to you in similes. And similarly, we can approach the Quran in that way. So he said, and then going back, that the mufassir, the person who does tafsir of the verse, in affirming the outward, is just on that outward shell of the oyster and is not approaching the inward jewel that is intended. Now, I just want to stop before I go on to the next section of what Imam Ghazali mentions, is that it's really important for us to develop this understanding of looking beyond, of affirming the outward, but then also looking beyond. And this, to me, brings into a discussion. Here at Taiba Foundation, we do education for the incarcerated, for people who are in prison, many of whom led a life of crime, which caused them to go to prison in the first place. And one of the things that they mention about criminal thinking, like if we try to analyze how does a person who takes on a life of crime, how do they think about things? How do they process things? And one of the generalities that the research has come to, it shows that it's the difference between black and white thinking and complex thinking. So when they interview or they speak to a person who's led a life of crime, before they've rehabilitated themselves, in a lot of things, in a lot of situations that are presented, it's black and white. It's either this or that. They're not able to think complexly. They're not able to look at nuance for the most part. There are, not to say that it's an all or nothing scenario, but they're not able to have this complex and nuanced thought. And the same can apply in society. Think about people that you interact with. There's some people who are very rigid about things, and it's black and white for them. And there's other people who, and it might be the same person, in certain areas it's black and white, it's clear. In other areas of their life, they can think in a complex way. Well, the Quran is trying to get us to think in a complex way, to think about those nuances, to not be just black and white, to have ibrah. And that's what the ibrah is, in being able to develop the complex thinking process. And this is what what I gained from this discussion about Imam Ghazali saying that we have to develop in us this skill about being able to take the ibrah from the Quran. Now, a very good question comes in the comment section. Can you only contemplate after you have mastered those 7 sciences? Very good question. A person does not have to master all of the 7 sciences, because a couple of things. As long as they submit to scholarship. So if an ayah comes up, it's not open to interpretation. We're not going to say, okay, everybody come on in and look at this. But Ibn Abbas says that there are 3 types of ayahs, and this is very important. 3 types of ayahs. 3 verses in the Quran. 1, you don't have to be a scholar to do tafsir of. The second is, you have to be a scholar to do tafsir of. The third is, even if you're a scholar, you can't do tafsir of. What are examples of those? Let's start with the first one. There are certain ayahs in the Quran, only Allah knows their meaning. These are, an example of these would be like the letters Alif Lam Mim, Kaf Ha, Noon, Kaf Ha Ya Ain Sad, Noon, Alif Lam Re. All of those ayahs. If you look at the traditional tafsirs, even though some maybe rare tafsirs will try to give an understanding or look at it through numerology and so forth, but mainstream Muslim scholarship said, Allahu a'lam bi muradihi. God knows best about what he intended by using those letters. And so that's something that even the scholars, even if they reach the pinnacle of scholarship, they're not going to be able to understand or uncover the true meaning of those verses. Some people claim to, and maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will show that to some people, but it's not a method that we can approach. If Allah gave that understanding to certain people, maybe it's possible. It's within the realm of possibility. But to try to uncover their meaning through an academic, scholarly approach, Ibn Abbas is saying that's a section that we're not able to do. Another example would be the mutashabihat, the ambiguous ayahs. And Allah says that the Quran is made up of muhkamat, clear ayahs, that their meaning is accessible through scholarship, and mutashabihat, ambiguous ayahs, that we just say Allahu a'lam, God knows best. But there is also one ayah in the Quran that says that ar-rasikhuna fil ilm, people who have deep knowledge might be able to attain that. And going back to that story of Imam Ghazali, as he was trying to grasp the meaning of those 5 ayahs that were ambiguous, it might be accessible to certain people if Allah gives it to them as a gift. But ultimately, they're unattainable through mere scholarship alone. That's what Ibn Abbas is saying about that section. The other section is about is for scholarship. So for this, you would have to know the language. You would have to know the grammar. You would have to go back. Even the scholars of the past, if they came across an ayah that they didn't know the meaning of, they would have to go and find out what that means. And this happened even at the time of the Sahaba. To give you an example, there's a verse in the Quran, Kalla la wazar, Allah says about Yawm al-Qiyamah. So the Sahaba at the time didn't, because there was multiple dialects of Arabic, they didn't understand what the wazar means in that ayah, until the ayah says, there will be no wazar. So one of the Sahaba was like, I don't know what wazar is in the meaning of this context, until he saw 2 Bedouin Arab boys, and the Bedouins were the most eloquent and speakers of the Arabic language, and often people would go to the Bedouin Arabs to say, what does this or that mean? He saw 2 Arab boys chasing a lizard, and they got on either side of a rock, and they had chased it in, and one had the exit covered, and the other person had the entrance covered. And so one of the little boys said, La wazar, meaning there's no way out. And so that Sahabi understood. He said, oh, that's what La wazar means, there's no way out. So when Allah is talking about Yawm al-Qiyamah, when everybody's scrambling to get away from the impending punishment and reckoning, there's no way out. La wazar. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us on that day. So that's through scholarship. And now we have many tafsir. You can go to the tafsirs, you can open this up, and you can say, okay, what does that mean? You don't have to master the science to be able to attain it. You can go to some of the recognized tafsir and access those, such as the tafsir of Imam Suyuti, the Jalalain collection, and then there's the type of a verse that is open to everybody. What does that mean? If Allah says, look at the skies and how He has sent down the rain, do we need a tafsir to know what that means? Sky, rain, have it sit down. He's trying to teach us, tell us to reflect on this. Or if Allah says to us, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, say Allah is one. You don't need a tafsir for that. You don't have to, some things are immediately apparent. If we look at some of the basic surahs, as long as we can understand what the words are in that surah, then we don't necessarily need a tafsir to give us what that actually means, as long as we're not going to delve too far. So say, for example, let's take a short surah, wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr. By time, human are at a state of loss. Okay, if we're going to stop there and just say, okay, that's pretty clear. General meaning, Allah is swearing by time, which is a created thing, and human beings are in a state of loss. You can understand that. Now, if you want to go deeper and say, what are some of the deeper meanings of this, then that's where you would need tafsir. So I hope that answers your question. But once we know that this is not one of the ambiguous ayahs, and we have access to the scholarship for the scholarly interpreted ayahs, or we're looking at some of the very clear ayahs. If Allah tells us in the Quran to look at the stars and look at the sun and look at the clouds and look at the rain and look at the ocean, that doesn't take a tafsir. Look at the sky. Look at the animals. أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. Do they not look at the camel, how it was created? That doesn't need tafsir. Allah is asking you to do something. Now go to the camel. Study that, scientifically approach it. And the more appreciation you have for the miracle of the camel, the more appreciation you'll have of what Allah is trying to show us in this Quran. And why does Allah choose certain animals in the Quran? You know, why is it the bee and the spider and the ant have a surah named after them? Why is there a dog mentioned in Surah Al-Kahf? Why is there a hudhud of all the birds in the animal kingdom? Why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only mentioned the hudhud or the ghurab, the crow? Why is it that the feel, the elephant was mentioned? And why is it that that story was mentioned in that way? So this is where now you can start engaging with the Quran and start reflecting. So I'll give you an example from Surah Al-Fil. Let's take a short surah. All right, so Surah Al-Fil, أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِأَصْحَابِ الْفِيلِ. Do you not see how Allah, how your Lord dealt with the companions of the elephant? And then it goes through the famous story of Abraha. Now, is this just a recounting of what Abraha did? In one sense, it is. It's recounting that, and it's showing the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what he was able to do. And at that time, it's also, he was reminding Quraysh of his blessing that he gave them. He said, don't you see what I did for you? And if you look at the surah right after this, and this is looking at the tanasub of the surah and the ayat, looking at why surahs were placed in a specific way and why ayahs were placed in a specific way. Imam Suyuti was the first to approach this. He has a book called I think it's the translation is Asrar. It has Asrar in the title. Maybe somebody can look it up very quickly. Imam Suyuti, but it's the secrets of the ordering of the Quran. Why are those ayahs and those stories and those surahs mentioned in that specific way? So I'd encourage you to purchase that book, have it on your shelf at home, open it up every once in a while. One of the things that he mentions and other Mufassirin mentioned this as well. He said you find Surah Al-Fil, and then the surah that's right after it is Li'ilafi Quraysh. Li'ilafi Quraysh means to bring Quraysh closer. So Allah presents this story of Ashab al-Fil. Look at what I did to the companions of the elephant, and look how they were destroyed, and look how they were made. How these miraculous type birds that were never seen before. And if you look at the tafsir, if I were to read to you the tafsir of those birds, it's not the typical birds. It's not like how some people say it's little birds the size of sparrows. That's one tafsir, but there's another tafsir that makes them sound completely different, like a very, very a legendary type creature. But Allah presents this to Quraysh, and then He says, "Look how I destroyed this massive army with elephants who were coming to destroy the Kaaba, and I did this for you." And then the next surah says, لِإِيلَافِ Quraysh, for the ilaf, to bring for the benefit of Quraysh, or to bring them closer. And so it picks up on the end of that meaning. So this is what happens. Oh, somebody just looked it up, says Asrar Tartib al-Quran. Thank you. Yes, it's Asrar Tartib al-Quran, and it's available in English, and the English translation has the English and the Arabic in it as well. Okay, so those are the three types of ayahs. And now I'll spend the last 10 minutes. You can, if anyone wants to put in questions, you can. This is the last of the three installments. One thing I will mention is that there is a master's thesis that was done on this book, on Jawahir al-Quran, and it's available online, and it was very, very eye-opening to me. And it's done by, let me see if I can find it. A critical analysis of the jewels of the Quran. Can somebody look that up very quickly and post the link? A critical analysis of the jewels of the Quran. The author is Amani al-Shimi, Amani Elshimi. And while somebody is looking for that, I'm going to scroll down to a very, very interesting part. Her dissertation actually answered a question for me that I had. Okay, so I got the page. Oh, so somebody says, didn't Imam Ibn Sirin tell the slave of Imam Malik that Allah was going to give Imam Malik openings to understand? I did not know that part of the story, Yahya. If you could look that up and give us a reference for that, that would be great. I didn't have that part of the story, but if you could look that up, that would be great. And it looks like Sister Saima, thank you very much. You found the PDF. Okay, so if you have that PDF, I'm going to ask everybody to scroll down to a page of that, but it's very, very good in helping you understand the jewels of the Quran, this book. And I don't know if she has, I don't think she has a translation of the book. She just has an analysis of it, but it really would help in terms of understanding. And her writing is very amazing. And she teaches literature in Cairo University. Actually, as I was reading her dissertation, it was last Ramadan, I came across it and I was reading it. I said, I would love to be able to have as a course for our students in prison, the jewels of the Quran, this text, and somehow connect with this Sister Amani, to maybe have her analyze some of the stories or the essays that they write, or at least guide them on that. So inshallah, that'll be something that we can look into for Taiba Foundation. But I want to end on the homework that Imam Al-Ghazali gave us. And if anybody read through Surah Yasin and took Imam Ghazali's challenge of why is Yasin the heart of the Quran, just post your thoughts about that in the chat if you were able to do that. Okay, and while we're waiting for anybody who had a chance to do that, I want to read what Imam Al-Ghazali says after he gives us this challenge. He says, لعلك تشتهي الآن أن تعرف معنى قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم ياسين قلب القرآن. That Yasin is the heart of the Quran. Now I know some people might think, well, this is a weak hadith, and it is. Its narration is weak, but there's no problem in using weak ahadith for fada'ilul a'mal, for virtuous acts. We do not take rulings in either theology, aqidah, or fiqh from weak hadith, but we can use it for virtuous actions. A prime example is Imam Al-Ghazali's 40 hadith collection. The hadith about memorizing 40 hadith is a da'if hadith, and Imam Al-Ghazali addresses this. He says, even though it is a weak hadith, he says the consensus of the scholars is that we can use a da'if hadith, a weak hadith, for virtuous acts. And this, naming a surah is considered a virtuous act. So there's no rule that's taken from this. So one question is, I had a question about the chapters at the end of the book where Imam Al-Ghazali mentions only particular ayahs of each surah. How are we supposed to understand those? Do you mean, is your question about, because he's only mentioning portions of the ayah, what are we supposed to do about the ayahs, the portions that he does not mention? Is that your question? So, for Surah Yasin, Imam Al-Ghazali gives us this challenge. He says, now look into Surah Yasin and try to figure out why it is the heart of the Quran. And then he says, and I will delegate Look at the words he used. An akila. He says, وَأَنَا أَرَى أَنْ أَكِلَ هَذَا فَهْمَكَ. I'm going to delegate the understanding of this to gaining of this to your understanding. So that you can do istinbat yourself, so that you can find these meanings yourself. وَتَنْبِيهُ نَفْسِكَ أَعْظَمُ مِنَ الْفَرَحِ بِالتَنْبِيهِ مِنْ الْغَيْرِ. Because if you were able to find something yourself, you will be happier than if somebody else helped you find that. Think about that. Subhanallah. He's an amazing teacher. This part of this, like every teacher and even parent should have this as a principle. If I can just indicate, guide somebody towards something, and then allow them to find it themselves, it's much more powerful than me telling them, the answer myself. And so he doesn't give us an answer. He doesn't give us an answer to why is Yasin the heart of the Quran. Now I've looked at, I've reflected myself on why I think Yasin is the heart of the Quran. And I've looked online to see what some other scholars, and it's interesting. There's a video online, if you type in Arabic, Ma'na Yasin Qalbul Quran. Yasin is the meaning of the Quran. One of the first videos that pops up is Shaykh al-Sha'rawi, the famous Egyptian scholar who was a great mufassir, explainer of the Quran, rahimahullah, may Allah be pleased with him. And he has a very interesting interpretation of why Yasin is the heart of the Quran, and he connects it to the story of the man who came from the far edge of the town to tell the townspeople to listen to the mursaleen, to listen to the messengers, and he goes through a whole process, and it was interesting. I mean, for me personally, I didn't feel that it hit home in terms of the meaning of it, but for him, that's what had a powerful impact, and that's part of Ibrah. Ibrah is going beyond that because there's no rulings. We're not deriving any theological or legal rulings. There's no aqidah or fiqh that we're getting in this Ibrah. We're just trying to understand. Here is a surah called Yasin, and it mentions certain things. And the Prophet told us that it's the heart of the Quran. Why is it the heart? Try to figure that out, Imam Ghazali says. Now, I'm not going to go in. Again, I'm going to leave it just as Imam Ghazali did. Read Yasin and try to figure out why it's the heart of the Quran. But I want to end on talking about the word heart. At the beginning of this, Imam Ghazali told us about the philosopher's stone, or al-kibrit al-ahmar, the sorcerer's stone. It has different names in English, but it was that thing that the alchemists looked for and said it exists in the natural world, that if we were able to get it, it's the elixir. We could change anything from one form to another. We could take lead and change it from one form to another. Imam al-Ghazali says that in terms of the jawahir of the Quran, the jewels of the Quran, those first three that talk about the that, or the essence, or the attributes, or the actions of Allah, those three together that he symbolizes with three jewels put together, that understanding, he said that's your kibritul ahmar. That's your secret to changing everything. Now that's from the element of looking at something that's divine. But I thought to myself, is there a philosopher's stone here in the dunya? Is there something? And there's a book called The Alchemist. I don't know if you've ever read it. It was interesting. It's fiction. It's a very short book, but it was one of the most powerful modern fiction stories. It's an interesting, quick read. And to me, whenever you have a story, again, this goes back to Ibrah, whenever you have a story that resonates with humanity, let's take some Ibrah with, let's look at it. I'm not a big Star Wars fan, but I know a lot of people are real big Star Wars fan. Why is that? Why was that story that encapsulated something, some meaning, why was it so powerful? And that's why fiction, we can't just look at it as stories. Fiction is the human being's attempt to try to encapsulate some deeper meaning in these outward images. And so when people when they get attached to a story or a book or a movie, even though they know it's fiction, why do we cry at certain parts of a movie? Why do we get riled up at certain parts of a book? Because it's our nature is we're not just looking at, we if somebody says, hey, why are you so upset, why are you mad, angry, sad, crying, it's just a story. Well, at one level, yes, it's just a story, that's the had, but the reality, it's pointing us to, it's making us think about something deeper that's not directly connected to that story, and that's what the ibrah is. So we can't just brush aside fiction. So whether it's this book, The Alchemist, or other others as well, I was reading the book, the Alchemist, and it's that person, the young man's journey from Andalusia to try to find the Philosopher's Stone, this thing that will allow him to change things from one form to another. And then I was just interested. I said, if the early Muslims who were talking about purification of the soul used the term alchemists, and they didn't believe, they weren't, maybe some Muslims actually did, and actually they did. Some Muslims did try to do alchemy. But the scholars like Imam Ghazali, they weren't using those terms for their literal meaning. They were using it for as a metaphor for the changing of the soul. How do we change the soul? I said, but just out of curiosity, what are some of the symbols that the people who used alchemy used? So, for example, if you type in Philosopher's Stone, I'll do it right now, and then you put in symbol, like what is the symbol for the Philosopher's Stone? You type it in and you'll find that it's a circle with a triangle, and then inside of that there's a square with a circle. So I just started thinking about this. I said, well, why is it? Why did they choose this symbol? And again, I'm not affirming any of the symbols. This is just purely anthropological, just looking at why human beings chose certain images and symbols and what they're trying to indicate through that. Well, something else that's always intrigued me is Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. If you type in Vitruvian Man, it's one of the famous drawings of Da Vinci. Now, if you look at what Da Vinci was showing with the Vitruvian Man, was showing the symmetry of the human being, of how every part of our body is very symmetrical. And I was very intrigued by this because Allah says in the Quran, الَّذِي خَلَقَ فَسَوَّى, that He is the one who created symmetrically, and you find perfect symmetry. And then He actually lists it out. If you go to the Wikipedia article, it'll show you the symmetry between certain things. So, for example, and I've done this at summer camps with Muslim kids, and I show them the symmetry that's mentioned in the ayahs about human symmetry in the Quran, and then I say, and I go through the Vitruvian Man to show the symmetry of the human body, that 7 of your feet is your height, your wingspan is your height, 4 of your arm's length is your height. Your fingers, 4 of your fingers are your forehead, 1 between your nose and your lip. I mean, there's all of these. He lists it out. If you go to the Wikipedia article, you can find all of these, the symmetry of the Vitruvian Man. But what's interesting, and just really quick, I want to see if somebody else can pick up on this. And I know we're at the hour, but look at the image when you type in Philosopher's Stone symbol, and look at the image of Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. Because in addition to the man, what else do you see there? What else did Da Vinci put into that image? See if anybody catches it. And I know there's a what I see in that, in what Da Vinci did, is he has a circle and a square, and he shows that the human being's outstretched arms at different parts, it's all part of the symmetry of the human being. But I said, this is interesting. you have a circle and a square in the Vitruvian man symbol, and part of the Philosopher's Stone is a circle and a square, and the relationship between those two images. So I said, could it be that the Philosopher's Stone is actually the human being? Like, we're all looking for this physical thing outside in the world that could change something. Maybe the Philosopher's Stone, that thing that can change things, are human beings themselves. So I started reflecting on that and saying, is it a possibility? Exactly. So Sister Kelly, you see a circle and a square and triangle with his legs. So the circle and the square is there. That image is there. So and I know I keep saying Imam. Leonardo da Vinci was dabbled. I believe he dabbled in alchemy. So he must have been. But we can't take our deen from that. We're just looking. But then I read the sister's dissertation, and if you pull up the dissertation and go to page 31. Sorry, not 31. 33. And she takes a section from another book of Imam Ghazali, which is, and it's one of the last books of Imam Ghazali, The Alchemy of Happiness. The Alchemy of Happiness. So this was, again, here's my journey. I read the book The Alchemist, and I started thinking to myself, what is the Philosopher's Stone? I looked at the image, I saw the circle and the square. And then it made me think of the Vitruvian man. I looked up at the Vitruvian man and I saw, Da Vinci has the Vitruvian man and also the circle. And then I started saying, well, maybe the Philosopher's Stone is humans themselves. And then now read that section. And I'll go ahead and read it as well. So in this book, Imam Ghazali, in the introduction to alchemy, the Kimya, and it was originally written in Farsi, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Kimya Isadat, the Alchemy of Happiness. Anybody who speaks Farsi, please butcher my pronunciation or give me it's okay. But it's Kimya Isadat, the Alchemy of Happiness, and it's kind of like Ihya Ulum ad-Din. But it was written later in his life, so it has other things. So I'll just go ahead and read this. Know, O beloved man, that man was not created in jest or at random, but marvelously made and for some great end. Although he is not from everlasting, yet he lives forever, and through his body is mean and earthly. There's some issues with this translation. Yet his spirit is lofty and divine. When in the crucible of abstinence he is purged from carnal passions, he attains to the highest, and in the place of being a slave to lust and anger, becomes endued with angelic qualities. Attaining that state, he finds his heaven in the contemplation of eternal beauty and no longer in fleshly delights. The spiritual alchemy, which operates this change in him, like that which transmutes base metals into gold, is not easily discovered, nor to be found in the house of every old woman. It is to explain that alchemy and its methods of operation that the author has undertaken this work, which he has entitled The Alchemy of Happiness. Now the treasuries of God, now the treasuries of God, listen to this. The treasuries of God in which this alchemy is to be sought are the hearts of the prophets. The hearts of the prophets. Alayhim salam. And he who seeks it elsewhere will be disappointed and bankrupt on the day of judgment when he hears the word, we have lifted the veil off of thee, and the sight, and your sight today is keen. فَبَصَرُكَ الْيَوْمَ حَدِيدٌ. So I just thought that was, to me, that was an interesting, it answered the question to me that the Philosopher's Stone, what is it? What is it that can change us? What can change our state and our spirit? Could it be the human being is that philosopher's stone? But of all the human beings, then Imam Ghazali answers us. He said, not only is it any human being, it's the hearts of the Anbiya. It's the hearts of the prophets. And for me, when I read Surah Al-Yasin and thinking about it being the heart of the Quran, Yasin, according to many scholars, is the name of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But even if we go to the scholars who said it was not a name of the Prophet, but actually a name of Allah, and that was the opinion of Imam Malik, the surah there is a consolation for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, speaking to him, speaking directly to him, and many of the ayahs in the Quran speak directly to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's giving him even the metaphor of the previous messengers and how they were treated. That was a consolation for him and what he was experiencing with his people. So that entire surah is Yasin. It's a discussion of or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing khitab of his Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And to me, that is the reason why it's the heart of the Quran. That's just my interpretation. That if this is a message to Yasin, to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it's telling him about who he is and who he is not, and that he's not what they say he is, that he is wa innaka lamin al-mursalin, you are from the messengers, that's why it's the heart of the Quran, because the way that we are to approach the Quran is through the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, through his heart. And if all of the Anbiya, if their hearts are that secret of change, then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his heart is that ultimate secret to change. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring us closer to the heart of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to give us that much more proximity to his book. And with that, I will end. And there are no questions. Jazakumullahu khair, everyone, for attending. And you can still send any questions to Taiba Foundation, either info@taibafoundation.org or you can email me directly at rami@taibafoundation.org. And if you are not familiar with our work at Taiba Foundation, please check out our website. We also have a Launch Good campaign going on right now, and we're looking for donations to continue our programming. Alhamdulillah, in the last 10 years, we've served over 7,000 Muslim men and women who are incarcerated. 90% of them have converted to Islam. So we're bringing a lot of what you're seeing in the videos that we produce. We're bringing elements of that to Muslims incarcerated. Jazakumullah khair for listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.